Welcome to Talking Impact, your go-to podcast for exploring the powerful connection between mental health, education, and resilient youth. Join us as we uncover insights and stories that inspire classrooms, stronger minds, brighter futures, and a lasting impact in our society. We have John Mighton here today at Talking Impact, who's the founder of Jump Math since 2002. This organization's been utilizing the brain story of change and the learning processes that we all rely on, but so often are missing, especially in mathematics, to inspire a whole generation across Canada and internationally, not just to enjoy math, but to figure out more about life, to understand the world and how they fit within it through math. And one thing I love about it is that I get to do jump math with my daughter on a regular basis, and I'm sure that'll come up. But John, thank you so much for coming onto the show today and for the conversations that we've been having. I wish that we'd been able to do this when we had dinner about a month and a half ago, and we had some great talks about our programs, the alignment and the science and the research, as well as really the simple approach of how do we equip the teachers in the classroom to build those young people one step at a time and to engage in their stories, whether it's through math or science or social emotional learning. John, you're a playwright, a mathematician, and an inspired human, and you launched this organization in 2002. One of the things that you said struck me was around that children are born with a sense of invisible beauty in the world. They love patterns, puzzles, and connection. When you watch jump math lessons, what does it look like to see that invisible beauty come up in a young person or within a classroom?
Well, I just did a couple of demo lessons yesterday, actually, and the kids, when you allow all the kids to succeed or do the same work and feel they're equally capable, and that doesn't mean they're necessarily moving at the same speed. I tell kids I'm a slow mathematician, but some kids may do a few more questions, but they're doing roughly the same work. When you allow that to happen and you take away the fear of failure or looking different, then universally, I just saw it twice yesterday with grade 2 kids, grade 5 kids. Kids get really excited about succeeding at math, about making discoveries. And it's even more like it's particularly exciting when they're in a group because they start to feed off each other's energy. You get what Durkheim called collective effervescence, which we never feel anything more powerfully in groups. So that's why we decided to focus on the classroom with Jump. We do provide some tutoring and support and so on, but it's really great to see kids in a group getting excited together about math.
Awesome. We have a lot of teachers, parents who are listening, psychologists working in the school system with young people. I bet they would want to know a little bit more about the program itself. You start with the origin story. I find learning through story, as you do, one of the most effective ways to understand what something is and how something works and how it can help me. Maybe to walk us through the journey, the issue that you saw within mathematics and how Jump Math has really been a force of change within the world of mathematics in school.
Well, I struggled in math myself when I was younger. I almost failed calculus the first time through. And I didn't get the confidence to go into math until I was in my 30s and went back and eventually got a doctorate. And when I was finishing my doctorate, I really wanted to give something back to the local community. I didn't want kids to feel that they couldn't do math the way I did and to give up on, I think something that's really a natural talent in almost all kids. I've met very few kids, I've taught thousands, who couldn't learn math at quite a high level. And so I started a tutoring club with friends to just teach kids after school. And one of the first girls who came literally couldn't count by twos in grade 6. She was testing at a grade 1 level. They thought her IQ was 70. And I didn't know how I was going to teach her at first. She was in an absolute panic. But I developed a way of teaching with her. And within 3 years, like after 3 years of tutoring, she went into academic grade 9 math. And then she skipped a year and finished academic grade 10. So I was stunned, like either she was very badly misassessed or something happened to her brain. I think it's a combination of both, but mainly I've seen now with so many kids that math can literally rewire the brain and make them better thinkers, more confident, It can improve executive function, their ability to stay on task and plan and strategize. So math, that's what got me into Jump. I began to realize math. If you care about equity and helping kids realize their remarkable potential, one of the best pathways is through math.
Explain that to me, because I think you mentioned that in your TED talk around the how improving math skills leads to greater literacy. However, greater literacy doesn't lead to greater math skills. How does this, from a brain science perspective, work?
I mean, greater literacy can lead to greater math skills, but there's now several large longitudinal studies that suggest that for younger kids around kindergarten age, math is a stronger predictor of success at school, even stronger than literacy. In fact, early math achievement predicts later achievement in reading more strongly than early reading achievement does, which I think is what you're referring to. And that's surprising to people that for young kids math can be so important. And at all grade levels, there's just so much evidence that math is a big barrier to success academically and then in life, the kind of careers people will get. I heard someone, I recently spoke to the Education Raters of America and heard an academic say that in Texas, if you don't get some kind of college certification within 6 years of leaving high school, whether it's college or university, you have less than 20% chance of earning a living wage. And the same person said that the biggest barrier to college completion is math courses, even if you're in the arts. So we did a study with a community college in Toronto, and a lot of the kids couldn't even get into culinary arts or carpentry because they couldn't pass the math courses. So it's just tragic how much time and money students are wasting at university, for example, because they can't get through the courses they need. And that's just one example. Like at all levels, math is really the gateway to success. And there's evidence, like for instance, that if adolescents don't get good teaching in math, they develop a deficit in a neurotransmitter that helps them in problem solving across all domains. In Jump, we were involved in a randomized controlled trial, and in the Jump group, kids did significantly better in reading compared to the control group, even though there was no difference between the reading programs. And the kids, they tested for everything and controlled for all variables, and the researchers thought it was probably because of the math. So there's evidence at all levels that math is far more important than people think.
That's amazing, fascinating, and I definitely see it firsthand. Like I said, my last night I was doing math homework with my daughter. It was jump math. Very different approach than what I saw as a kid. Let me ask you this, John. When a young person's taking jump math, what's going on under the hood, and how is that different from the standard behavior model that we approach when it comes to teaching math?
Well, I think the reason math scores have been flat or declining across North America, and there's we haven't there's pockets of success and so on, but in general, we're not doing well in math. We're not doing well internationally. Canada has started to decline over the past couple of decades. I think the reason is because the predominant approach to teaching math has been let kids discover as much as possible. The teacher shouldn't guide them too much. That will stop them from developing their own approaches to math or from really engaging in math or understanding it deeply. And, that sounds plausible. And especially if you want to create problem solvers who are resilient, who can struggle, it sounds plausible that you'd start the year by giving them lots of rich problems, applied problems, so they can see how math applies, and let them struggle with them and develop grit and find their own ways through mathematics to discover deep understanding. So that's the model, but it's clearly not working. We've got now evidence on a massive scale. And the reason is because we're mistaking where we want to get kids to. We want them to be resilient problem solvers for how to get there. Like in chess, you don't learn to play chess efficiently by just playing the game over and over again. If you play mini games that have been designed by experts to help you see what a good move is, how a piece moves, and so on, and gradually you stay in a zone where you're just stretching yourself a little bit. It's called deliberate practice, or the 85% zone for optimal learning, or the Goldilocks zone. Not too hard, not too easy. That's the optimal zone for us to learn and to be engaged in learning. And if you keep novices who don't really have a lot of knowledge of the subject in that zone and give them a lot of support and success, they eventually become experts, and they do far better than kids who play the full game of chess from the beginning of the year, you know. So we keep throwing kids off the deep end, and the results are just abysmal. Abysmal. Like in Ontario, only 50% of kids pass the grade 6 exams, provincial exams, when it should be more like 95%. You know, it's so I don't know. The system has to take account of the research on how kids learn best, and also start asking why things aren't improving.
Absolutely. And you and I are part of this, I think, movement to more, not just evidence based, but research backed approaches to learning that are really based on how we learn. We've talked a
Yeah.
lot about, you and I, the brain science of change and learning, and each of our chapters as well as our entire programs are based on that. How have you leaned onto that? Is that something you discovered before starting Jump Math, or was it this eureka moment? Like, that's how I've been doing it, and that's why it works. What was your interaction with that, and how has that helped you to grow and scale Jump Math?
Yeah, that's a complicated question, because I think it started with my own struggles. And I thought I had to be born with ability in math. And if I didn't just instantly get stuff, I couldn't, I wasn't a natural mathematician. It took me years to realize I could train myself. I could learn by breaking things into small chunks, practicing, pushing myself a little outside my comfort zone. So I had to learn it for myself. I had to learn that that's the optimal way to learn. And so then when I started tutoring, sometimes with very, very challenged students who were really struggling and far behind, I had to learn to do that even more. I had to learn to scaffold into micro variations where I didn't change too many things at a time. And that didn't mean the kid wasn't thinking or the kid wasn't discovering things, but they needed to be led along a pathway where they could actually make those discoveries. I learned the importance of practice, and particularly of raising the bar. I mean, kids love mastery. They love showing off. They love meeting challenges. And I saw it's an incredibly powerful motivator. Even when you're doing abstract math, like kids don't really care. They like applications, but they will also work on much more abstract math or deeper mathematics if they're in that zone where they're having success. So I had to do that with myself first, and then I learned to do it with students. And then I learned that you could do it with some teachers invited us to come into the classroom because we were placing tutors in schools in Toronto and Ottawa. Teachers said, why don't you come into the classroom and help, see if you can help. And then I saw that it was even more exciting with a group of kids. You could literally tutor a whole group of kids and keep them in that zone together.
They build off one another and they get
That's
excited
right.
together when they're solving
Hmm.
the problems.
Yeah,
That
that's right.
was my experience. There was this line, one of those acrostic things that you had to get a letter from every math problem you solved, and
Yeah,
it was time for homework. So of course my 8-year-old, oh, I don't want to do it. Oh, I'm like, hey, just show it to me. Like, hey, what do you think? There's a riddle about a bee. And
yeah,
she had to solve all the questions to get all the letters. And so rather than becoming, oh, I have to practice math, it was, oh, I get to solve a bigger problem by
yeah,
doing these math equations. And it totally
that's right.
changes the paradigm and perspective. And all of a sudden, I'm working with her. Her 5-year-old brother's trying to help out because he wants to
Hmm.
find out what the answer to the riddle is. And I think
Yeah,
so much of learning is like that, John, so much of that.
that's
And
right.
something that I keep thinking about is this quote that I heard recently is if a young person is saying I don't get it, that's a win. It's a sign that they are engaged and actually onto something, and they're curious and they're wrestling with it, and they're hoping that by interacting with their teacher, their parent, or their peer, that they can put two and two together and solve the problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because in the two classes I just did, um, I started by telling the kids that if you don't get it, it's my fault. And you can ask me again. I'm not teaching it well. And I feel confident in making that promise because I know I can find a pathway for each kid. And usually it's the same pathway for everybody, but I can always customize things. And I think kids what happens, what destroys that kind of curiosity, that willingness to engage or say, I don't get it, and that I want to get it, is first saying, the teacher might not have a great resource where the kids are seeing all the time that they can trust that resource of the teacher to lead them, that they can, say, I don't get it, and they know they will. That's one problem. The other is when people design resources, I don't think they really take account of hierarchies in the classroom, or when they select resources. They'll select something that has some wonderful, rich problems or graphics or whatever, but there's research showing as early as grade 1, kids know if a teacher has different expectations for them. No, and I love teachers; they're my absolute heroes. They're responsible for the growth of Jump. But even a great teacher sometimes can't hide it from the kid that they're different from the other kids, or that they're struggling. And when a kid decides they're in the inferior group, their brains just shut down and they stop engaging, learning. It becomes a vicious cycle in math, because once you start to fall behind, it's very hard to catch up. And then that anxiety makes it even harder for them to think. And so one of the things that stops kids from saying, I don't get it, they don't want to look bad in front of their peers, or like they're in the inferior group. And they just eventually develop a guessing instinct. They just don't want to be called upon. They don't want to look like dummies in front of the peers. And so that has a terrible effect on the class. It destroys that group energy, because only a few kids are succeeding. And so that too many people are selling or promoting resources that do nothing but exacerbate those hierarchies. Only the top 50% is succeeding, or 30%. If you care about the lower half of the classroom and actually allowing everyone to move further together, take care of the kids at the bottom end and make them feel equal first, and catch them up and make them feel like they can participate equally. In which case you're forced to structure lessons that actually teach the way the brain learns. Give more scaffolding, give more practice, meet the kids where they're at, and move from there. If you care about all the kids, you just have to structure your lessons in a way that is in line with the science of learning.
Absolutely. It starts with the feeling aspect, which we talked about our confidence module. It starts with the feeling confident,
Yeah, exactly.
not feeling like I got this. It's not about bravado or being the smartest kid in the room. It's about knowing that, hey, I don't get it is a good thing. And I have people to help me get it, and a process to go through.
Yeah, and I think, there's a great book called Drive by Daniel Pink, where he summarized a lot of the research
One of my
in the behavioral
favorites.
sciences. And apparently some of the researchers who are featured in the book wrote the introduction, so it's probably a pretty good representation of their work. And he said that some of our strongest motivators are a sense of purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And we really underestimate the impact of mastery with kids. I mean, in both my lessons, I had kids reading big numbers into the quadrillions. If kids can read numbers in the hundreds, they can read numbers of any size.
I can't do that,
And
John.
so, yeah, well, it's too bad you weren't in that class, because the grade 2 kids were doing it and they were so excited. But the grade 5s reacted the same way. I did as a little warm up for both classes before I got into the lesson, and exactly the same reaction at both levels. The kids were just amazed that they could read numbers of any size. And you might think that's really boring, reading numbers. The whole class was so fired up in both cases. They were actually begging me to go to higher numbers. And so we don't understand how much kids love being in that zone where they're having mastery. And also they love repetition more than adults. They love extending patterns that might be obvious to an adult that they've never seen. It's just the ideal zone for them to be in. And so, that it's not only saying to the kids, first I have to admit I don't get it, and I want to try, and I trust you, and I want to work with you. But very quickly they can see I get it, and I can get these things far harder than I've ever imagined, even though they're in that zone. It's not that hard for them, but it looks very hard. And then they begin to feel the sense of purpose, not only because they're discovering things and making connections, all their peers are enjoying it at the same time. They're all experiencing it together. And then the sense of autonomy kicks in. They start to choose to do extra work. The autonomy is wanting to be in control of your learning. And so they actually ask for bonus questions. They ask for extra work. So the classroom is just the ideal place to bring those three motivators that Pink writes about to bring them together in a way. Sometimes teachers can't believe it, how excited kids can get about math.
Mhm. Absolutely. Like, it sounds to me, John, it's a bit of just a shift in mindset almost, not just around math, but I
Mm-hmm.
think around so much and around even our own lives. Is a
Mm-hmm.
moving from, in order to feel confident, I need to know that I know this versus I need to be confident that I can figure it out. Not just me as an
Yeah,
individual, but
that's
the
right.
supports I have around me, those internal
That's
strengths,
right.
those external strengths. When it comes to mastery, especially, you talked about the importance of that. How critical is confidence to mastery?
Well, you have to at least, when I learn new math, I'm not that confident. I'm always got a sense of anxiety. I'm not going to be able to get this. But you have to have confidence that if you stick with it and persevere, that you'll get it. And that's what you can give kids very quickly. We do confidence building lessons in Jump that where it looks quite hard to them, and it seems, it's often beyond their grade level, but the entire class sees I can do it if it's scaffolded well. And so I think confidence is a really important starting point. It doesn't mean they have to, they have to learn eventually to struggle and so on. But that zone, the 85% zone that I talked about in Nature Communications, in Nature magazine there was an article called the 85% zone for optimal learning, and they argue that there's a lot of evidence that we're happiest and learn most efficiently when we're about 85% proficient at something. We've almost got it, we're just stretching ourselves a little bit. Now, that's not an exact number, but roughly, or as I mentioned, the Goldilocks zone, not too hard, not too easy. And to build a deep confidence and a confidence that will allow kids to persevere, even when they're worried they might not even succeed, to build that, you need to keep them in that zone for a long time. And for students who've struggled or weaker, that zone is very narrow, and you can so easily push it out of them and push them out of it. And when you push them out of it, you've lost them. They start to get anxious. They don't believe they can learn. And so we train teachers and give them resources that help them always keep their kids in that zone. And faster kids, you can always throw up a few bonus questions that look harder, that allow them to work independently. But when the kids who typically struggle are in that zone long enough, they often become the faster students. I mean, they literally wake up, they start to focus more. And so I can never predict often within a few lessons who are going to be the strongest students.
I love that scaffolding approach because it's not just true to mathematics. We worked with Jean Cote and Luc Martin from Queen's University, who are sports psychologists, and
Mm-hmm.
they'd done research previously on the path for professional athletes as children, all the way
Right.
through late adolescence. And it's not this. It's not a hockey stick curve, and it's
Yeah.
not a sustained growth curve. It's ups and downs while
Yeah.
the level of difficulty increases just to the point
Yep.
where they're still willing to try, where they're not
That's right.
losing that confidence, but they're loving the game because it's getting hard enough. If anyone's played a
Yeah.
board game or a video game, the
Yeah.
ones that we stick with are the ones that kind of just get a little bit harder as we get a little bit better. And all of a sudden, we're totally wrapped into that narrative, into that story.
And it's amazing that educators, and this is not the fault of teachers, it's the consultants and the people who often make a lot of money off of these failed programs. Um, it's amazing that teachers don't have more exposure to sports psychologists. Like when we meet someone who's a gym teacher, they get Jump instantly. They know about that zone,
Yeah.
or that they don't
Performance.
have, or that psychologists don't have more power in their boards. Psychologists know the research on how people learn, and unfortunately, the teachers don't have access to that wisdom often. Um, and it's when you're talking about a kind of a shift of perspective for teachers, the sad thing to me is that it's actually they don't need a shift of perspective. They need to be allowed to teach in a way that they know works. So I can give you an example. They need to be shifted back to what they know because they've been pushed away from it. So I've surveyed hundreds of teachers and said, if you're tutoring a kid in grade 5 who's 3 years behind, I just did this the other day when I was doing those lessons in debriefing with the teachers. I just said, supposing you're teaching a kid who's 3 years behind in grade 5, and you're tutoring them one-on-one, what would you do? All teachers say we'd go back to that level, We'd scaffold the learning into manageable chunks. We'd vary one or two concepts at a time or skills. We give tons of practice, and we teach to mastery because we know that we can change our approach. We can make sure one-on-one we help that kid get it, and we'd raise the bar to build confidence. So that's basically the science of learning in math,
Mm.
and the teachers already know it. But they've been pushed away from that in front of whole classes. With the whole class, they've been trained. No, you have to throw out a rich problem. Let kids find their level. Don't interfere too much. Let them share their work. The kids aren't teachers. They're talking about these wonderful solutions. First of all, the other kids aren't necessarily getting it. Secondly, they're just creating hierarchies that have doomed the lower 50% to never succeeding. That's why the lower 50% never succeeds. Because teachers have been pushed away from what they know works. So that's the saddest thing for me. Like the change of perspective has to be let teachers do what they know how to do, and get them some
Yeah.
help from psychologists and cognitive scientists who can confirm that what they're doing works.
Yeah. That developmental spectrum is so important, and we do a very similar thing. We're always hearing stories and feedback from teachers, so much so that we've kind of made it a thing to look out for, is that kid in the back of the
Hmm.
classroom with their hood up, and
Yep.
how over the course of their hero's journey, that hood starts to come down, that
Yeah.
hand starts to go up. And it's, when you work that way forward, the kids at the front of the class aren't missing out. Now those kids at the
No,
front of class are able to learn how to engage people in something they've already mastered or are in the process of mastering. And the
that's right.
modeling from that teacher shifts that whole classroom's temperature or energy, as you said.
Yeah, so you've seen exactly what we see in Jump is, that's the first, if I'm teaching in a behavioral class or a grade 8 class where a bunch of the kids have given up, those are the kids I target for. I try and make sure are succeeding first, the ones with the hood over their head or that have completely disengaged. And generally, almost always, I can get those kids engaged by the end of a lesson. And it's great for the teachers to see that and also to see, as you said, that that doesn't mean anyone's being held back or bored. The kids at the front of the class get to go further because everyone's moving further together. They get to get excited. I did a lesson once in a grade 6 class in Toronto that Carol Dweck actually watched and said, she
Wow.
said, because I was keeping the kids in a zone where they were doing things that look hard but weren't too hard, that would help them develop growth mindsets. And Carol Dweck is the researcher who started that line of research. So she confirmed that that zone is the optimal zone where it's not too hard, not too easy. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
when I was teaching that lesson, at one point, I put out the kids were working on perimeter problems, and at first, about a third of the kids were so far behind. I had to do a lot of scaffolding, but by the end, they were doing these perimeter problems where they were finding missing sides of rectangles given the perimeter, things like that. And at one point, I just put up a few bonus questions, and all I did was make the numbers a bit bigger. And the kids got more and more excited. And when we train teachers, we ask them, which kid in this class do you think is a gifted kid? And there's this one girl who's literally standing up in her chair, waving her hand when I make the numbers a little bit bigger. Now, that was a trivial problem for her. And why is she so excited? Why is she the one kid standing up when she's light years ahead of the other kids? Well, I think it's for the first time she's able to show off, and without being a nerd, she gets to be part of that collective excitement. She's always been excited about math. It's nice that all her peers are finally excited. And I never
Yeah.
bored her. I could go over and give her a problem with decimals if I had to. When I give bonus questions, I want to make sure they're on the same topic so no one feels anyone's doing different work. And just hard enough that I don't have to go help that kid. So, because I want to be able to spend time with the kids who might need a bit
Right.
of extra help. But it's funny that she's the one standing up in her chair for problem that's pretty trivial for her, and that goes back to what you said. The kids, everyone. When you take care of the kids who traditionally struggle or are turned off, everyone benefits. Everyone goes further together. Everyone gets more excited together. You don't have the behavioral problems anymore or the distractions.
Absolutely. Something we talk a lot about is, our program is utilizes a universal prevention tool, but why? And it's we're raising the baseline. and you're doing the
Ah,
same thing. And by raising that
that's right.
baseline, not only are you helping those who are falling behind, you're giving those who are thriving an opportunity to go further and
That's
imagine
right.
more and really
Exactly.
fall in love with mathematics and life, to be honest. And question I had, I'm curious, and going back to your early origins here as a a screenwriter, you almost failed calculus, or you did the first time.
I was saved by the
What do you
bell curve. It
see?
brought me up
Yeah,
to a pass.
right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I've been saved by that a few times. So, when you think of that, your own story struggling there, like how has that turned into not just a passion and an ability to teach math in a more effective way, but how's that help you to identify and always keep a hold of in mind that kid at the back of the class, having been in that environment before for yourself?
Well, I also not only almost failed calculus, I got the lowest mark in my creative writing course. And in my 20s, I discovered this book of letters by Sylvia Plath to her mother. She's an American poet. And it was clear she taught herself to write by sheer determination. I mean, she would memorize poems, write imitations of poems. Her early poems are very derivative, but gradually, as she developed her craft, you could see her voice come into her poetry. So that was a revelation to me in my 20s that you could actually train as a writer. And I did that relentlessly for a decade and have had success as a writer. Um, and then did the same thing in my 30s in math. And so and people think, oh, it's very strange that you're a mathematician and a playwright, as if you're using one half of the brain, you have to leave the other half empty for storage. Uh, why couldn't kids have universal abilities in every field? I wish someone had told me this when I was 12 and I hadn't wasted all those years. I wish I'd had great teachers and tutors when I was young, because maybe I'd be doing there's other fields I want to learn now. I'm
You're
running
doing
out of
pretty good,
time.
John.
But I feel I've barely touched the surface of the things I'm curious about. And kids have this natural curiosity, this sense of wonder that they gradually lose through failure. We think it's natural for kids to graduate from high school having one interest or one talent, you know, or to think that, it's not a great tragedy if kids can't see. We think it was tragic if they couldn't see the visible beauty of the world, if they didn't appreciate a mountain or a star. We think it's natural for them to not have any connection to the invisible beauty of the world, which is just as breathtaking. And you can only see through science and math.
Wow. I think we need to save that clip. Something that you and I shared is a love for Isaac Asimov and Foundation, and I think something we said on our walk back to the hotel was, through math, young people can understand the universe, and through the Heroes program, they can understand why they're in it. And I've been chewing
Mm-hmm.
on that since. It really just came to me in the moment through the walk. And there's a lot of, I want to get onto the entrepreneur side of John. But before I do, I wanted to just ask that question around Asimov and, science fiction, and how, as a young kid who wasn't naturally gifted at math, you fell in love with it as a result of, your reading and your hobby of science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wish Jump could also be a writing program or a program about reading and literature, because that's what kept my hope alive and my curiosity alive, even when I wasn't succeeding. I mean, Asimov's story where this psychologist uses math to predict the future of the empire, and it's such a visceral and incredible story. Even when I wasn't doing well at math, I was absolutely fascinated by it because of that story. Or I read this other short story about two kids who somehow use a Mobius strip to travel in time. So I suspect that the math wasn't too sound. I'm not sure. But for me, I learned about Mobius strips and the amazing properties they have, and that you can actually do magic tricks with Mobius strips. It was the stories and the science fiction that kept my curiosity alive, even when it wasn't being fed in math class necessarily. So,
Mhm. You understood that it was a key.
yeah, it was like a magical world you could go into and manipulate and understand the universe at a much deeper level than I'd ever imagined. And so that's the kind of thing that kids need access to. They need their curiosity stoked and their sense of wonder.
I know you already covered this and touched on this earlier, but I'd like to ask again, how your love for story as a playwright, as someone who's fascinated with science fiction and technology, how does the art of storytelling already kind of show up through the jump math programs?
Well, you know, if you say to teachers at a very early age, like, will kids sit still and watch a puppet show? Is that good for them to see a puppet show? They'll say, yeah. So a math lesson can have a narrative structure just like a puppet show, where the kids are the heroes going on a journey. They're meeting these challenges. They're seeing, as like climbing a mountain almost, all how the things they've learned are going to get them to the new level in the story. And they're experiencing it together with a great storyteller, the teacher. That math can have the same kind of impact as a great puppet show, and kids can enjoy that adventure collectively.
Very cool. We'll get before we end today. I have some more personal questions. Just I'm curious and find just so fascinating the ways that we can play with learning now that we understand that it's from the feelings out and building that confidence and that journey and that narrative and really bringing young people through a story about themselves, not just about the math problem on the
Yeah.
table. But I'm curious, John. John is the mathematician, John is the playwright, but also John is the entrepreneur. How you built it is something that fascinates me, and I'd love to share with the listeners. You started this as a tutoring tool in 2002, and you've been able to scale that across Canada and internationally in a very difficult space, both as a charity. There's lots of additional regulations and different things and hoops that need to be jumped through as a registered charity, and on the other side, in math, and something that's kind of one plus one is two, isn't it? Just teach the kids that. Very behavioristic. And I say behavioristic, our whole education system has been that for so long, but it seems like math is the one that's so often just a default. Let's do route memorization and call it a day. um, how did you build it, John? You started tutoring, and where did you go from there?
Well, I've gotten some recognition as an entrepreneur, but I'm not sure I deserve it. I've made so many mistakes. Just in hindsight, there were so many mistakes I made. Um, but on the other hand, like I think basically I have an endless sense of optimism, and that's been both a curse and a blessing. So I could never have survived in the school system if I didn't have a sense of optimism. Because no matter, we've produced good results in randomized controlled trials, even better results in pilots. No matter how much great data we produce, no matter how much cognitive scientists and psychologists advocate for us. I mean, it's been 20 years, and only now we're starting to have real breakthroughs and get district adoptions or provincial adoptions. It's been a really hard 20 years. And I've always thought, we had a New York Times article that was the most emailed article in the Times, where a teacher took a fairly weak grade 5 class. Within 2 years, they all write the Pythagoras math competition. All but 3 get awards of distinction, and the other 3 came close. When that came out 15 years ago, I thought, now we have it made. Now it's going to be easy. And every 5 years, I keep thinking it's going to be easy now, and it never is. And so I would have given up long ago if I hadn't had that sense of optimism. That's maybe the one thing that keeps me going as an entrepreneur. I keep just banging my head against the wall. But it's also been a bit of a curse because, I've always been overly optimistic sometimes when we develop a resource. It's just going to be, it won't be too hard for teachers to pick this up or, to use it. Or when we've tried to form some partnerships and things like that. I've sometimes just been overly optimistic and wasted my time on things that weren't going to go anywhere. But at Jump, one thing that differentiates us as a charity is that we can spend that time and we can fix things and we can constantly make the program better. So if it didn't work in one form for a teacher, we'll find out what they need. Like, for example, we had very dense teacher's guides with scaffolded lessons.
Yeah,
And some
seen
teachers just
those.
didn't have the time or were overwhelmed by them. So then our publications team created these amazing slides where you have all the diagrams, all the assessments and questions that you can project on PowerPoint, for instance. And so you then have an abbreviated version of the lesson at your fingertips. So teachers say they can learn as they teach. So that's something that took us a while to figure out. So I
Teachers
think
want to be. So I was just going to say, teachers want to be mastering things as well.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's not enough time. We realize there's also not enough money for professional learning to make up for some deficits teachers have through no fault of their own in the math. And so we realized we had to create something that would allow them to learn the math as they teach it. And so any of the innovations we've come up with have been from being in the trenches and being optimistic enough to stay in the trenches and to try and fix things. There's so many things we could have done more quickly, or we could have, for instance, I should have just done. We eventually did randomized controlled trials and big studies. We should have done those way earlier, say across one grade level, and just get the evidence really early. So we made lots of mistakes on the way, but it's really the optimism that's kept us going.
What's been the biggest barrier to your growth, and what did you learn from that?
The biggest barrier is that unfortunately the education system until recently has been pretty immune to evidence or science. Now that's fortunately changed. We've seen a huge change since that podcast Sold a Story came out, where um, you know Sold a Story really mobilized parents to think about how their kids were being taught to read, and it became clear to parents that the school system wasn't necessarily following the science of learning. That there wasn't enough emphasis on phonics and decoding in the programs the school system was buying, or in the gurus whose programs were being promoted across North America. And parents mobilized and organized themselves, and that's had a massive impact. And cognitive scientists and psychologists. So now in reading, like in Ontario, there's actually the Right to Read report that says kids have a right to structured phonics programs. That's a massive shift. It's only starting to happen in math, and unfortunately, most of the people don't know what the science of math is.
And so you've learned to basically, not just keep banging your head against it and pursuing it, but to tinker. I think I'm not
Yeah,
doing my job if I'm not either tinkering, refining, or building the next program,
that's
and
right.
aligning it with the latest in the research.
Yeah, and we have a great team. Just to say, we have a great team of writers, editors, layout people, publications people, um, professional learning people who are, and now a whole tech team who are constantly doing that tinkering.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and for the mentorship, alignment, work that you're doing across Canada, internationally. Jump Math, if you're listening and watching this episode and you want to learn more, check out Jump Math online. John has an amazing TED Talk and a lot of interviews that you can also dive into, and opportunities to learn, especially if you're a teacher, not just by engaging with Jump Math, but also engaging with the brain science of change learning opportunities and collaboratives that are happening across Canada. So thank you all for listening, and have a great day.